Alright everyone, it's time for a little bit of a cautionary message for Gen Z. I was young once. I mean, I'm not old yet, but I'm closer to middle age than I am to youth. I'm no longer a teeny bopper or something like that. Here's a message to Gen Z. Link in the description, archived of course. Interesting article that actually you should read, especially if you happen to be Generation Z. I realize that my average audience is more millennial, but there are a lot of younger viewers too. In their 20s and shit like that. Here's a little bit of a cue. When you look at politics, it's easy to become like really hyperactivistic, especially when, you're in your young 20s especially, early 20s, college age, something like that. And you think you're going to change the world as a result of your activism. Physical activism has actually come more into focus now. With the millennials, it was more like a fucking change.org petition or something like that. Don't be taken in by the political class. They don't have your best interests in mind. They never will. There's no such thing as progress. It does not exist. There's only change and reactivity to current situations. Progress is merely reactive in form, in other words. So you have a current political paradigm, a situation, economically, socially, you're in a war, whatever it happens to be. You have to react a certain way. Progress is that once that ends, the socio-political situation has changed, the war has ended, maybe another war began, etc. You have to react to it. Preferably you're proactive, but government is pretty terrible at that, so it tends to be more on the reactive side. When you, therefore, this article is about Kamala Harris, and it's sort of a pitch to Gen Z. Don't be taken in by Kamala Harris's sudden seriousness, is literally the title. I like how seriousness has become one of the main themes of the campaign, as though it fucking matters. Look at the linguistics of it, for example. The more intelligent Gen Zers will understand what I'm saying. What does it matter? What's the purpose of seriousness? What is serious? Can you identify it? It depends on the situation. It's entirely situational. Something that was suggested 30 years ago may no longer be serious now. It might be considered farcical. Something that was suggested 10 years ago now might be considered odd. Something that's suggested now, it might be helpful, it might be unhelpful. That's my advice to Gen Z. As a millennial, I was dragged through the Iraq War period, the Patriot Act, 9/11, all of these other things, which, Gen Z generally will not remember. If you're on the older side of Gen Z, you might remember some of that, but for the most part, it's lost on you. The government lied to me for years and years. It started wars, and it did unserious things. It did things that, in retrospect, seem absurd. Invading Iraq, for example. Well, yeah, you lost tens of thousands of servicemen and killed hundreds of thousands of civilians, removing one dude who was summarily hanged, by the way, and we all got to see that footage back in the days when you could actually see something like that on the internet. For absolutely no reason. It made no sense. In retrospect, we re-examined the situation in which we thought we were reacting to and said, shit, we really fucked up. Afghanistan is another example. Did we get Osama? Well, I've never seen his death photo, so I'm not sure that we did. I have a feeling that he died of kidney failure long before the raid there in Pakistan. That being said, again, in retrospect, we realized we needed to end that war because it became like literally a forever war. It went on for more than half of my goddamn lifespan. And we realized that the premise upon which it was predicated was not exact. It was a little shaky. Osama bin Laden, for example, we invaded Afghanistan and we killed Osama, supposedly, in an entirely different country, which Benazir Bhutto actually warned us of, and then she was assassinated shortly thereafter. I thought that was very coincidental, by the way. That got memory hold really, really quick. When you look at the Patriot Act, for example, people after 9/11 are very afraid, and they think that they need the government to protect them because they're fucking stupid. So the Patriot Act passes. Huzzah! Raise the American flag. We're patriots, right? Oh, it's actually about spying on your library records for fear of a handful of terrorists. invading the Fourth Amendment completely, in the process literally waging war on free expression. Do you remember protest zones? I remember this when Bush was running for re-election, actually. And they would set up like protest zones. You weren't allowed to protest unless you were in that little fenced-off area far away from the venue. You remember that one? Oh, that would go over so well, by the way, if Donald Trump were to do such a thing. He doesn't give a fuck, but, you know, if he did, it'd be considered a national incident. These things happen all the time. What seemed to be sensible at the time, and every time passes, is not always retroactively seen as sensible from the future looking at the past. Like, for instance, slavery. Slavery seemed sensible at the time. Somebody had to pick the cotton. Well, yeah, but we look at that as a dark blotch on our nation's history. We don't look at that as a virtuous sort of thing. Well, it seemed sensible at the time that women shouldn't be considered members of the militia and therefore shouldn't vote. The former, by the way, technically true. But now we look at that and we say, generally speaking, people say that was a bad idea. You know, women should have been allowed to vote because they have, you know, an equal share of interest in the country. We look at, you know, the fucking Indian Wars, anything under the sun. We look back at historical events, and we always find them to be rather dark and dreary, actually, for the most part. There are some soaring achievements, building the Panama Canal, etc., but people will look back, especially the younger generation, and say, wow, things were fucked up back then. I would agree with you, by the way, if you're talking about the 2000s, especially the musical scene, yeah, things were definitely fucked up. They're fucked up now, though, too. What you're being offered, Gen Z, by Kamala Harris is not actually progress. It's not even really change when you think about it. The problem is the socioeconomic and diplomatic situation has shifted rapidly over the last half-decade. Kamala Harris represents effectively the status quo. Trump represents change. That's the long and short of it. That's the funny part. I never thought I would see, and this is the last piece of advice I would give, as a millennial, the Republicans, when I was younger, were the party of war and corporations and attacks on free expression. You know, oh my God, we need to censor the radio channels and shit like that. That was the Republican Party when I was young. It has changed fundamentally. The Democrats now more closely resemble what the Republicans were back in the bad old days of George W. Or latter term Ronald Reagan or something like that. They're almost identical, actually. And it surprised me. I never thought it would change. That's I guess the last piece of advice I'll give you. Expect change. It will happen. You'll be very, very surprised. You know, you're 20 years old right now, 25 years old. The political and socio-political paradigm that you're experiencing now will be rapidly different by the time you're like 35, 40 years old. It will change. I never expected it to change. I just assumed that political paradigm would always be in sway. But it's not. It's completely different now. The GOP magically turned into a populist / classically liberal party. The Democrats became the party of, you know, a combination of war and communism more than anything else. So yeah, a little bit of advice for Gen Z. Expect change, and don't be taken in by the DC insider crowd, because they don't give a fuck about you. They want to send you off to war to die. Now I'm 36. They can't draft me unless all of you die. So I'm not too worried. I have faith in you, you know, when they send you off to World War III. Unless a nuke hits Rutland, and I don't think anyone would waste a nuke on Rutland. But they want you to die because it's profitable. When you die, politicians will get to salute over your casket and take a photo op. That's basically the sum and substance of what they believe in. They're psychopaths, for the most part. That's about all. Peace out.